Before I get into this, just a quick orientation. Take whatever fits, leave whatever doesn't. This isn't advice, it's just something I've been thinking about today. I had a conversation earlier today with a guy about 30 years older than me. We just met. At some point, the conversation turned to the military. Turns out he'd been in the Army, and he spent a lot of years doing the kind of work that really puts a toll on your body. At some point in the conversation, he told me that he had broken 11 bones while he was in. Retired out at 37, and from the way he described it, things just kind of collapsed after that. His body, his life, everything started catching up with him. You could hear it in the way he talked about it. There was a lot of weight in it. Not necessarily bitterness, but a kind of certainty, like he had seen how the story ends. And once he found out that I had also been in the military, the conversation started turning in a specific direction. He started telling me that eventually my body was going to fall apart too, that it was just a matter of time, 5 years, maybe 10 years from now. But eventually it would catch up. My spine would deteriorate, my joints would start going, all the usual things that come with carrying weight and doing hard things for long enough. He said it in a way that wasn't really hostile. It was more like, this is just how it goes. This is just how life works. The interesting thing is, the moment he started talking about it, I could feel that something was slightly off. Not in a bad way, just in a way where I could tell that we were no longer talking about the same thing. Because the story he was telling me wasn't actually about me. It was about him. He had got out at 37. I got out at 24. He had broken 11 bones. I've never broken a bone in my life. And when I got out of the military, I immediately started lifting and training, learning how to rebuild and reinforce my body. For about 10 years now, movement has been a consistent part of my life, mostly between lifting at the gym and hiking. There was a stretch when I was living in Brazil for about 6 months where I wasn't in the gym as much. But even then, I was still hiking, swimming, and staying active. Movement never really left my life. Over time, I started learning more about how the body actually works, how muscles support bone, how strength reinforces structure, how movement maintains the systems that keep you functioning. So when someone tells me deterioration is inevitable, I can understand where that belief comes from, but I don't automatically accept it. At first, I mostly kept those thoughts to myself. I just listened. Because there's value in listening to someone who has lived more years than you. Experience matters. But eventually, he doubled down on it. He said something along the lines of, it's going to happen no matter what you do. There's nothing you can do about it. And that was the point where I pushed back a little. Respectfully, but clearly. Because my grandmother always said I marched to the beat of my own drum. And that's mostly how I've lived my life. Not because I think I'm special. Not because I think the rules of reality don't apply to me, but because I've seen enough in my own life to know that direction matters. What you do matters. How you take care of yourself matters. And the choices you make every day matter. As the conversation kept going, another layer started showing up. He asked if I was married. I told him no. Then he asked if I planned on getting married. And I said something very simple. I don't know. I don't predict the future. That answer didn't seem to sit very well with him. So we asked another question. Well, where do you want to be in 10 years? And I told him that ideally, I'd like to have my businesses taking care of me to the point where I have freedom over how I spend my time. Freedom over what I work on. Freedom over how I live. And again, that answer didn't quite land. Because I could see that the framework he had lived inside didn't really include that possibility. Not as a real option. It fell outside the boundaries of what he had experienced. And that's the moment where something became very clear to me. A lot of times when people talk about your future, they're really just describing their past. Not maliciously, not intentionally, just naturally. As humans, we like to make sense of the world by using experiences we already have. So when someone has lived through a certain kind of story, they start to assume that story is the universal one, that this is just how life goes, that this is the pattern, that everyone eventually ends up in the same place. But that assumption ignores something important. Different starting points exist, different choices exist, different paths exist, and even more importantly, different beliefs exist. Because belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes outcome. One of the things I've proven to myself multiple times in my life is that direction can change. When I started my first business, I was in what was essentially a labor position. Manual work, nothing glamorous. But over time, I started shifting things. First, that role turned into a desk position. Then eventually it turned into consulting for that same company, which meant the desk job became a contract position through my own LLC. I ended up controlling the position through my own business. There were a lot of people around me who didn't think that was going to work. Most of them were older. Most of them had seen the world operate in a certain way for a long time. So to them, the structure of the system looked fixed. But it wasn't fixed. It was just familiar. That experience reinforced something I've believed for a long time. You don't control every single detail of your life, but you absolutely influence the direction it moves. And direction compounds over time. Small adjustments today can become completely different realities 10 years from now. When I think about the future, I do have a direction in mind, but I don't pretend to know exactly what the destination looks like. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. Because every time you reach one horizon, another one shows up. Every time you grow into something you once thought was impossible, your imagination expands again. The horizon moves. And that's part of what makes life interesting. If the destination were fixed, if the endpoint were already fully defined, life would be incredibly boring. So when someone says, "This is how it's going to go for you," my first thought is always very simple. Who said that? Did I say that? Because the only person who actually has to live with the outcome of my life and my decisions is me. And at the end of the day, I'm the one sitting with the results of my decisions, my action, my inaction, my effort, my discipline, my persistence. No one else sits in that chair. And one thing I know about myself is that perseverance is something I take very seriously. Things don't always work immediately. Sometimes they're slow, sometimes they're messy, sometimes they stall. But that doesn't mean the direction is wrong. A lot of the time, it just means you haven't stayed with it long enough. And patience and perseverance are deeply connected. And the people who build the things they actually want in life usually have both. There's a common idea that change happens in these massive, visible leaps, huge breakthroughs, dramatic moments. But most of the time, it's much quieter than that. It's small steps, repeated over and over again. Tiny adjustments, daily effort, small improvements that compound until eventually the outcome looks dramatic from the outside. But from the inside, it just looked like consistency. Another layer of that conversation was about spirituality. He talked about his relationship with God, about doing Bible study, and that's something I can respect. If someone finds grounding in faith, that's a meaningful thing. But even there, the same dynamic showed up. The suggestion that if I were truly spiritual, I would eventually see things the same way he did. And again, I understood where that perspective came from. But I didn't accept that it had to apply to me, because belief systems are personal. And the internal world someone builds inside themselves becomes the lens through which they interpret everything. One of the beliefs I carry strongly is that each person is, in many ways, generating their own universe. What you believe becomes the framework through which you interpret events, which influences how you behave, the opportunities you notice, the outcomes you experience. So if someone believes the world is fundamentally limiting, they will eventually find proof of that. And if someone believes growth is always possible, they will eventually find proof of that too. Neither belief makes someone better, but they absolutely change the direction of a life. I'm not under the illusion that I control everything. Life is unpredictable. Things happen that no one plans. But I do believe that within that uncertainty, there's an enormous room for authorship, room to choose how you move, how you respond, and how long you keep going. Sometimes people mistake their past for your future. Those two things are not the same story. Sometimes they're not even the same path. And they don't have to end the same way.